Hi everyone, thank you for joining Discover the SDGs, convened by the Conscious Fashion Campaign in collaboration with the United Nations Office for Partnerships. I'm Emily Chan, Sustainability Editor at Vogue Global Network, and I'll be moderating today's session entitled Collaboration to Drive Positive Fashion. I'm delighted to be joined by Lotta Tahtinen, Chief of Outreach and Partnerships Branch at UN DESA Division for SDGs, Caroline Rush, Chief Executive at the British Fashion Council, and Nikhil Hirdaramani, Director of Hirdaramani Apparel. We'll be discussing how collaboration can be used as a tool to drive sustainability within the fashion industry. So before we begin, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction to their work. So Lotta, I wondered if you could start by introducing a little about the work that you're doing at the UN.
Absolutely, and it's such a pleasure for me to be on this panel, and thank you for inviting me. Our division, which is the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, we actually helped member states and other stakeholders to develop this agenda back in 2013, 2014. We supported the very extensive intergovernmental negotiations that took place to really formulate this agenda. And now, since the agenda has been adopted, our team is following up on how this agenda is being implemented at the global level. We're trying to engage different key stakeholders and sectors in its implementation. We try to offer advice, research, and guidance on how to best achieve the SDGs.
Caroline, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your work at the British Fashion Council.
Absolutely. So the British Fashion Council has been engaged in, I think, promoting sustainable fashion at the heart of London Fashion Week since 2006. But this year we launched a programme called the Institute of Positive Fashion. And this came out of, I guess, sort of the changing landscape and the need from responding to the queries we're receiving from our designers. So the aspiration behind that is to be a catalyst for change, to connect our smaller businesses with global initiatives, to really translate some of those big targets into what action plans might look like for a designer business, to make sure that there's a, those pathways that bigger businesses are adopting might be translated into a smaller business, to set a high bar of accountability, and really to sort of push that agenda around global collaboration, because without that, we're really not going to be able to achieve the Paris targets that were set. We've got three pillars of our IPF, as this has become the shorthand name for our institute. The first, of course, around environment, the second around people, and the third around community and craftsmanship. And you can imagine across all those three is we're able to champion various different SDGs and make sure that the work that we're doing and the programs we're looking at all signposts to make sure that we are raising awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals through the work that we're doing as well.
Great. Nikhil, would you like to introduce yourself and the work that you're doing?
Hi, my name is Nikhil Hirdaramani. I'm a director of Hirdaramani Apparel. We are an apparel manufacturing company with factories in the subcontinent, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and in Ethiopia. Sustainability has been very much part of our DNA. As I say, we're a fourth generation family business. It's very much in our values. Personally, I have been really sort of leading this sustainability initiative within our organization, but also from an industry point of view, I've been on the board of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, as well as other sort of global initiatives that feature collaboration. As I say, it all involves, I think SDG number 17, collaboration is probably the most important SDG in my opinion. In order to achieve the SDGs, we all need to work together, and it's great to be on this panel as a manufacturer representing, because I think we play a very important part in what needs to happen.
For sure. Well, fantastic to have you all on the panel today. I wanted to kick off the conversation by discussing a little about what collaboration looks like for you and your organization when it comes to driving positive change within fashion. So Caroline, you already mentioned the Institute of Positive Fashion. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how you see the role of the British Fashion Council as being in terms of facilitating collaboration within the fashion industry. I know you joined forces with the CFDA on the Fashion Industry Reset Letter. That's another example of collaboration.
We did, and I think it's collaboration at all different levels. So when we first our first iteration of the Institute of Positive Fashion was really doing a global mapping exercise to make sure that there's no duplication in the work that we do. We want to make sure that we're amplifying the work of the Fashion Charter, of the G7 Fashion Pact, of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, to our members and to businesses within the UK. So it's really important there's no duplication, is that we've got no time for that, is that we are on this race to net zero, is that we want to make sure that all of our work and energy and resources are put into really helping businesses address climate change. Is that in terms of collaboration with the CFDA, is that came out, of course, well, we collaborate quite often with our international counterparts. I'm not sure that people are as aware of how often we talk to each other, but particularly in this year when we were looking at the impacts of the pandemic on our businesses, really thinking about what the industry will look like for the future. That idea of sort of collective knowledge, discussion, and then sharing the outcomes of that are really important when you have so many small independent businesses, so that they're understanding what the bigger conversations are, what the direction of travel looks like, so that they can start to plan. You know, planning in this year has been incredibly challenging, I think, for any business, but particularly for small businesses, that sharing of knowledge is incredibly important, because of course everyone is time poor, everyone wants to make sure that they're focused moving forward. And when we're thinking about impacts on environment, is that the idea behind the reset letter was with a mindset of, you know, retail closing, the impact on supply chain, the amount of waste that was building up within our industry. And we know there's a huge amount of waste that happens within the fashion industry in any case. But with that front of mind, is really focusing from a designer business perspective, is that what does creativity look like? How can we address these challenges? How do we try and slow down the fashion system into having sort of two core collections? Of course, you've got to service the retailers, so with multiple drops. And if there is a pre-collection, for that to be very much around product that can sort of drop in between those sort of big creative points. So we were very aligned in terms of that. We're very aligned in terms of how we want to make sure that as an industry we're moving forward, and that really our businesses are set up for success for the future, because if they don't address the impact of climate change in this decade, is that not only as an industry, but as a, you know, as a planet, is that we have bigger challenges to tackle.
For sure. And Lotta, I wanted to go to you in terms of how the UN collaborates with kind of key figures and organizations within the fashion industry to create change. And I know the UN Fashion Charter is obviously a big part of this, as are the SDGs. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the primary roles of the UN is to really act as a convener, you know, bringing different actors to the table to share information, to share lessons learned, and also, frankly, discuss what are some of the challenges that are being faced, and what are some of the solutions for overcoming those challenges. You know, the UN brings to the table not only governments, which have a really key role in the SDG agenda by setting, you know, the policy frameworks that are needed at the national level, etc., but also all the other actors like trade unions, like civil society, but also the business itself. So some of the ways that the UN has been engaging all these different multiple actors around the issue of sustainable fashion is the United Nations has created a United Nations Alliance for Sustainable Fashion, which has been really trying to promote for coordinated action in the fashion sector to, number one, reduce the negative environmental and social impacts that this industry may have, and also trying to really turn fashion into a driver of SDG implementation. The UN has a particular private sector arm, which is called the UN Global Compact, which is the world's largest global initiative for promoting corporate sustainability. They have in place, as you may well know, 10 key principles for promoting corporate social responsibility and sustainability. And the Global Compact has also trying to really engage with the fashion industry to bring them to the table at the UN and to align their strategies and operations with the SDGs. And I'm really thrilled to share with you here today that my department, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, together with the UN Office for Partnerships, we are launching a new action network on sustainable fashion this month, where we really hope to invite some of the industry leaders to come together and register with us your good practices that relate to SDG implementation and partnerships, so that we can in turn share this knowledge broadly across all our networks with governments and with other actors.
Amazing. And Nikhil, I wanted to ask you a bit about what collaboration looks like from a manufacturing perspective. I wondered how important is collaboration when it comes to, for example, I know that you have 4 sustainability pillars as well: water, waste, energy, and people, if I'm right. So yeah, I wondered how much collaboration is important in terms of achieving those goals.
Well, I think we've come a long way in our sustainability journey. I mean, we started our, as I said, I mentioned to you, it's very much in how we do business. But I would say our the new sort of strategy was developed maybe about 10 years ago, and we opened, the first ever carbon neutral factory in Asia, and that's when we really started the whole, transmission of the sustainability strategy and started working with customers in that way. I think first of all, you've got to collaborate within. So I think having a clear strategy within our own teams and the buy-in, that's, I think, the first collaboration we needed to do. But it's amazing how the relationships have all changed. I think with customers, we have built we've done many joint sustainability initiatives with customers down our supply chain. And so that continues. I think what is new now is that we're seeing, other parties come into play, looking at the whole industry collaboration. So we're part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Jeans Redesign Project, trying to make a sustainable jean. And we're working with different stakeholders from across the supply chain, not just our customers, but suppliers. And I think that's really the new elm, and then the new norm and the future. So again, it's as I say, it's become a long way. We used to be, as I say, when I joined the business, it was very transactional. I think we're seeing definite partnerships now building between all stakeholders. And as I say, it's the only way that we can achieve and be more sustainable. We can't work in isolation. So I'm very optimistic, and I think what COVID has probably taught us in the last couple of months is that there's a dying need for us to address some of the challenges we have now, and the only way is to work together. So that's my take.
Yeah, and I wondered if we could talk a little bit specifically about the importance of collaboration when it comes to advancing the SDGs. And obviously fashion touches upon many of the SDGs. So goal number 12 comes into mind: responsible production and consumption. Goal 13, climate action, but also other goals like gender equality, clean water, life below water, life on land. So I wondered, maybe Lotta, if you could talk a little bit about what types of collaboration you would like to see within the industry, or maybe that you're already seeing when it comes to advancing these SDGs.
Yes, I think you really touched upon the key issue here, and I really loved what Nikhil was sharing with us about the initiative related to sustainable jeans. I think this is really taking us in the right direction. One of the key defining features of the SDG agenda is, of course, that all these 17 global goals are so closely interlinked, which means that action around one goal can have tremendous positive impacts across the entire agenda, or conversely, it may also result in some negative trade-offs that really need to be addressed and analyzed and understood. So through our research, actually, we have assessed the different interlinkages that exist between the different goals. And we have found that SDG 12 on responsible production and consumption is really one of those goals that is most interlinked, has a direct impact on all the other goals and across the entire 2030 agenda. So this is really an area where I would like to see more partnerships and more action directly related to SDG 12. And of course, you know, when we reflect upon the fashion industry, because of the sheer size of this industry, you know, we're talking about an industry that employs almost 70 million people worldwide. And it's also the second largest income generating source across the world with almost $2.5 trillion in sales value. I mean, fashion industry has such a huge potential to really make an impact globally. For example, on SDG 5 on gender equality, because the majority, almost 80% of the industry workers are women. And as you pointed out, at the same time, while you have this tremendous potential for making a impact, the industry also has some really serious challenges it has to grapple with, including the fact that you know, it's the second largest consumer of water, and it's responsible for almost 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So what I would really like to see is moving forward for the fashion industry is really trying to see how to move towards the more circular production cycles and models, where resources could be reused and used as long as possible, regenerated throughout all the different value chains, of course, while controlling pollution and waste.
Yes, for sure. And Caroline, I wondered, how aware do you think designers are about these SDGs? Obviously, there's a lot of talk about sustainability at the moment within the industry. I wondered whether you think the knowledge is specific enough, that the people are really kind of knowledge about the ins and outs and what sort of goals they should be working towards.
I think probably from our younger designers that are very focused on building businesses that have less impact, is that there's much more awareness at that level of designers that are starting up that we've seen over the last sort of maybe 3, possibly 4 years even, but definitely the last 3 years. But there's definitely an opportunity to grow that, and I think is the conversation around how do we move to a more circular fashion industry is very much on everybody's agenda. And I think is that one of the projects that we've been looking at and potentials to collaborate is look at how we can collaborate around innovation. So whether that's around transparency in the supply chain, whether it's looking at waste ecosystems, what that would need to look like in the UK to really be able to properly move to a more sustainable circular fashion system, and also what does that look like as an ecosystem? You know, what other businesses might come out of that, what new skills might be required to make sure that not only are our business in terms of design thinking about the circular fashion economy, but making sure that the touch points and infrastructure are in place, and that's not something that can be done alone by one business or even just by the industry. It does need engagement with education, with research, and of course by policymakers as well. So that's one of the things that we have on our agenda to try and tackle in terms of sort of first projects for the IPF, and there's certainly been a lot of enthusiasm around that. Certainly it'll need research and input, but it is something that we think will help us then be able to look at sort of the touch points within circular fashion that relate to the different sustainable development goals. And I suspect is that if you were to ask me the question in even a year's time, is that there would be greater awareness than there is now. I think particularly again in the UK, we've got COP26 next year. is that there's going to be a lot of conversation around what's the impact of the fashion industry and what are we doing to address that. And I think that businesses, hopefully by the end of 2021, will be referencing the Sustainable Development Goals in their own strategy.
Yeah, I think you're right about having COP26 next year. I'm sure that will raise a lot of awareness. I wondered, Caroline, I wanted to ask you about whether you think the pandemic has kind of sped up kind of collaboration within the industry. We've seen a lot of industry-wide kind of open letters calling for change. We touched upon the fashion industry reset letter that the BFC and the CFDA kind of came together on. I wondered, yeah, do you think that the pandemic has sped up these collaborations? And I wondered particularly the different types of collaborations. So as you say, seeing kind of brands coming together to tackle issues within the supply chain, to kind of invest in new technology and innovations.
Well, I think certainly the pandemic has accelerated the opportunity to collaborate. And I think as an industry, what we've been reflecting on now we're sort of getting towards the end of 2020, is how the industry has really adapted, how it's collaborated and how it's stepped up in many cases. And I think is that the industry has shown that it can collaborate when it needs to. And, you know, there's never been a bigger reason why the industry needs to collaborate than our, you know, the future of our planet. So certainly is something that has been accelerated. And I think in the past is that we were an industry that was on sort of this constant cycle, where is that it seemed to be just speeding up constantly, that you didn't have the time to reflect. And people that have literally been grounded, they've had the opportunity to really think about you know, the kind of business they want to be for the future. And I think that's allowed space for this to be embedded in terms of their strategies going forward. I think when we sort of look at sort of examples of that collaboration and coming together, it is around really rethinking what the system might look like. But also within businesses, we're hearing stories where, for instance, people had to get on an aeroplane to maybe go and visit Nikhil to look at product development, and they've figured out that actually you can do it remotely, so that, you know, actually is that practices within our industry will change for the future. And I think it's a great time to say is that, you know, the industry can adapt, the industry can change, and it is changing. And we need that good news at the end of 2020.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I wondered, Nikhil, on the subject of kind of the pandemic, a spotlight's definitely been shone on the importance of protecting garment workers within the fashion industry. You know, we've seen the news of billions of dollars of cancelled orders from major brands, and kind of campaigns to ensure that brands are kind of committing and fulfilling their commitments when it comes to those orders. I wondered how important is the relationship between brands and manufacturers when it comes to ensuring you know, proper working conditions for garment workers and that they're paid fair wages?
Well, I mean, as I say, I think you know, the need to work together and collaborate is very important. I think the industry has taken you know, there has been some tensions in the last couple of months, obviously with the pandemic. You know, and we built, you know, on sustainability, we built, you know, very strong relationships in the last couple of years. But obviously, what has happened, and I think Caroline also mentioned, the model has failed, and I think we need to really rethink the model for the future, because a lot of people have been affected by what has happened with cancellations, the impact of you know, and in many of these countries, you know, there's no furloughing, or, you know, so it has been challenging, and I think that. It brings the whole discussion of what we're talking about, is how do we work together as an industry and understand the impact of what is going on across the whole supply chain. And I think that what has come out of all of this is that consumers now are aware of the impact that has happened on the supply chain. And I think we now need to work together to figure out, you know, what we're going to do and fix it. So I think it's very, very important. This is a great opportunity to discuss this and figure out the future. Because yeah, I mean, without the workers, you're not going to get garments. So I think we need to figure out how we're going to address that.
Lotta, I wanted to ask you, how do you think we can improve collaboration within the fashion industry moving forward? You mentioned kind of the work that you're doing at the UN in terms of new models, in terms of moving towards a circular fashion model. I wondered if you could talk about how you think we can improve collaboration within the industry.
I think one key issue would be to share information across different actors and to, as I mentioned, to really learn from each other. What works, what doesn't work, what are some of the other entities out there doing, how can you tap into what are they doing, etc. I think really this information sharing is absolutely key. So one of the ways we are trying at the UN to help different actors in this is that we have a number of online platforms where actors can come together, share information, share details about projects, try to connect across different sectors, across different countries, regions, etc. So I would really like to invite all of you to look at some of those tools. We're also trying to produce some detailed guidance books on how can you really create partnerships that can have an impact on the SDGs, that can add value. All of these resources are available on our website, which is sdgs.un.org. And I invite you to look at that website. We also have a platform on this website where we are registering, for example, SDG good practices by different actors, by partners, by coalitions. If you have any SDG related good practices, any actions that you want the UN to be aware of, please go there and register your actions. We will be delighted to take those on board. And we will also be showcasing these different initiatives throughout our events over the year.
That's fantastic. That sounds like a fantastic initiative.
And I just want to echo. I think that's a great initiative. I think it's very, as I say, we have been involved in sustainability for 10 years, and to have an opportunity to to do case studies and showcase what's being done on the supply chain is a great. And so I echo and commend that initiative.
Nikhil, I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, how do you think we can improve collaboration within the industry? Are there kind of particular aspects that you would like to highlight? Because I guess the voice of the manufacturing side is not always as strong.
So one thing I know we've touched on a number of things about circularity in this conversation. I think we do need to go back to the business case. And I think, at the end of the day, we're running a business. We have lived in an era of fast fashion, right? And I think we need to, there's always a business case. To be sustainable does cost more money at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for many years we've been, running sustainable factories because it's the right thing to do, right? And I think it's just very much how we do business. It's how we want to do business, but there is a cost to it. And I think that, when you look at a lot of these initiatives, especially when it comes to circularity, a lot of these initiatives are being tested in labs in various parts of the West in many ways. And how do we, commercialize these into the areas where manufacturing is happening, and the funding of it? Because I think, at the end of the day, there's so much opportunity, but I think where it stops is where who's going to pay for it? Is there going to be a customer? Is it going to be, because everyone benefits out of it? But it just doesn't take off sometimes, so there's so many initiatives I've been involved in and seen, and I just hope that they can move forward, because I think if we can get them going, we can change the industry. So I think this is where facilitation of these initiatives, potentially funding. I know that ESG is the big buzzword at the moment in the industry, in the finance world. Bring parties together who can really see the benefit. We're already talking about the apparel industry being one of the most polluting in the world. I mean, so there must be interest to try and fix it, and there must be some benefit out of it. So I think where we can create case studies, bring in you know, other stakeholders to invest, or you know, the experts. I mean, at the end of the day, my focus is manufacturing clothing. You know, I can bring in, if we can bring in the experts on climate change. It's good to see that with Ellen MacArthur, that where the circularity, we're bringing in the experts to address an issue like that, and we're involved in that. I think that will really, really help.
That's great. And Caroline, I wondered, how do you think we can improve collaboration within the industry, particularly this idea of kind of accelerating progress, because obviously there's been a lot of discussions. I wondered how do we make sure that enough action is taken quickly enough, and how do we do that via collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that particularly in the next 12 months, in the run up to COP26, that we try and get as many businesses signed up to the Fashion Charter, the G7 Fashion Pact, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, so that there is that critical mass. And, you know, they're great platforms to be able to start sharing that knowledge and share that information. And then one of the things and the roles I think that we can do as organisations like the British Fashion Council or even our international counterparts is use our platforms to showcase, you know, some of that innovation and the way the industry is moving forward, to signal that it's, you know, this is the way forward for the industry, but also to create opportunities, you know, as Nikhil said, maybe to bring investment together, to start conversations with government, and to really shine a spotlight on what is possible if everybody comes together and collaborates. And I think is that using, you know, we're in a very unique position where we have these global platforms that speak to both fashion industry and consumers, and quite often get the attention of government as well. So to make sure that we're using those platforms in a really powerful way. And we started that last year, is that we have a relationship with the UN Office of Partnerships. And so we were able to use our Fashion Awards as an opportunity really to celebrate the founding signatories of the Fashion Charter, and really put that on a platform when we had sort of all of the global brands and young British designers in one room to say, look, is that, you know, let's celebrate those that are leading change, and let's follow them and make sure that we're part of this movement now.
Can I just also outline also, I think one of the things I just wanted to mention as well is that from a measuring tool, it'll be great. I mean, I've been involved in the Social and Labour Convergence Project, which is, you know, trying to reduce audit fatigue, where it's a common assessment amongst all the customers that we're trying to implement across the industry. So I think it'll be really useful if there can be some sort of standardized assessment of how we measure sustainability across the industry, and if that can be facilitated, because I know there's been reductions recently, but I think we just need to, you know, at the moment there's still a lot of measurement tools out there, and sometimes people can get confused. So if that can be standardized to a certain extent, that will really help the industry.
I wondered, I think we're almost out of time. I wondered if we could finish off the discussion by talking a little bit about whether we're moving in the right direction on this, because it does feel like the industry is becoming more collaborative. I think maybe perhaps there was a time when brands would be a bit more competitive, a bit less open to sharing information and knowledge. So I wondered if you could all maybe talk a little bit from your experience, whether you think the industry is becoming more collaborative, and whether we're moving in the right direction on this.
I have seen change, yes, and I think is that it's a mindset change around businesses, around what's expected in terms of financial reporting and environmental reporting, and I think you know, there's the sort of the mindset of big business and the expectation from the city, and then the mindset of the young designers coming through. And I think is that that's proving to be a really powerful combination in terms of change of attitudes, whether that's inherent in the way that you've been brought up in the society that you're living in at this moment, versus the pressure from board to make sure that action is being taken. And it does feel that there's momentum, and certainly the pandemic has accelerated that. I guess is that the one thing we need to be mindful of is there's great news about sort of, you know, the vaccinations coming through and is looking at sort of returning to whatever a new normal might be, is not to lose this opportunity for change. You know, this actually, if there's any good that has come out of 2020, is it's using this as an opportunity to really embrace that collaboration that has happened over the last few months, to make sure that we're moving forward as quickly as we need to.
Yeah, I think that we still need to probably get the consumer on board to a certain extent. I think there's been a lot of discussion about. I think consumers are changing; they're changing their attitude, and I think there are a lot of surveys about will people pay more for sustainability, and I'm not sure. Though there's a lot of interest, I've seen stats that maybe they don't want to pay more, and I think so either we have to fix it then within the industry to make it, as I say, to make it competitive. But I do, having been in this for 10 years and seen the change, I always believe that I always live in hope and believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm beginning to see that now. And I agree with Caroline. I think the whole pandemic has made us all think, first of all, we're acting more sustainable. We've seen how the environment can be, without driving and being locked up at home to a certain extent, we can see what it does, what greatness it does to the environment. And we all understand it. We all acknowledge it now. And so we understand it. So I think there will be a change. But as I say, the business case still needs to be looked at, and hopefully by working together, we can create that business case.
Yeah, I would agree with Caroline and Nikhil, and that we have been moving in the right direction. Not as fast as we would like to see the movement, but nevertheless, and we have now 10 years left to implement the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. And even before the pandemic hit us, we were not on track to meeting these global goals, frankly, by their deadline. So now we are entering into what the Secretary General calls a decade of action. So that these 10 years where we are in right now, these are really the ones that can make or break this agenda. It's the decade of action. We need everybody on board. Governments, of course, are in the driving seat of this agenda, but we need all the sectors on board. And the fashion industry has been doing tremendous steps and efforts. And really, like Caroline and Nikhil said, this ongoing pandemic, and in particular the recovery from this pandemic is really a huge opportunity also to see how are some of the investments, the money that is being spent by governments to help societies recover, where is that money going into? How is it spent? Is it being spent in areas that promote sustainability, like sustainable energy, etc.? This is really a critical juncture, and I think it's time for all of us to act together.
I think that's a great message to end on. Well, thank you so much for all our panelists today for your time and your insight. I think it's been a really interesting and informative discussion. And thank you to those watching for joining us today.